we're going to be looking at Hanukkah because we have, starting December 12th, the night of December 12th, which is Tuesday night, is the first night of Hanukkah. And I'll admit that growing up in traditional churchianity, we did not look at Hanukkah. We looked at it on the calendar, saw it on the calendar, and thought to ourselves, that's Jewish, we're not Jewish, and so no big deal. There we go. All right, so take the handout I've given you. Hopefully you've got a copy of it. I'm going to make some comments first on our Torah portion and then come back to this discussion of Hanukkah. You'll notice that chapter 30 of Genesis is one of the oddest chapters in the Bible. Just a lot of odd things going on.
Bring it back down again. I'm going to unmute it.
Okay.
Okay. There we go.
Genesis chapter 30. Go with me there. And I want to show you something that connects up with other portions. We want to hear echoes as we're thinking about this text. Look at Genesis chapter 30, verse 1. It said, "Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, 'Give me children or else I die.'" And what's he supposed to do? Okay, so he says this, "And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel. He said, 'Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?'" Okay. So he says, "Am I in the place of God?" Does anybody know where else in the Tanakh it says, "Am I in the place of God"? Anybody remember?
Job.
There's one other place. Anytime we have a phrase like this, we want to link it up with the only other time that's stated. Somebody else says, "Am I in the place of God?"
Joseph said that.
Yeah, Joseph, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Go with me to Genesis chapter 50. Last chapter of Genesis. Genesis chapter 50. You'll remember that Joseph has been, by this point, reunited with his brothers. And now, Jacob has passed away. He has died. And so the brothers now think that Joseph has been delaying any kind of retribution to them until their father died. And look at verse 19. I will read verse 18 first. It says, "Then his brothers went off and fell down before his face," that is Joseph, "and they said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' Joseph said to them, 'Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God?'" So what you see happening here is, with Rachel, the issue was the initial giving of life. And she says, and Jacob says, "Am I in the place of God to give life?" Joseph says, on the back end of this, "Am I in the place of God to take life?" And the answer, it's rhetorical, because no, you're not in the place of God to either give or take life. Life ultimately belongs to God, and only He has the ability to give it, and only He has the right to take it. Okay? So you're seeing this, one of these, we're seeing one at the beginning of, talking about the beginning of life, and one at talking about the end of life.
Sounds like maybe a popular idiom that Joseph likes to use.
Well, actually, the first one he uses is Jacob. Jacob uses it in, yeah, and then Joseph uses it in chapter 50. So it's interesting that here we have two prominent individuals saying, "Am I in the place of God?" And they're asking this rhetorically, which is, no, you're not in the place of God. Therefore, I can't give life, or can I take life? Okay. Go back with me to Genesis chapter 30. And through this narrative, we see how individuals are named. And one of the things I want to talk about in the future as well is how prominent names are, and how when you're given a name in the Hebrew Scriptures, it's not just a designation so that we say, well, you're so-and-so versus so-and-so. It's not just a designation. Oftentimes there were attending circumstances at one's birth by which you were named. And then all of these individuals in the tribes of Judah, all the tribes of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all the tribes of Jacob, all the names have meaning. And as the mothers give birth, they give names to each of the children based on how they're feeling at the time. Joseph, Yasah, he adds. God has added to me. Okay. Dan, to judge, from Dean. So God has judged me and blessed me with a child. So all these names have, here's the names right here, right on the front here. Here's our 12, right? Reuben, Simeon, Gad, Levi. Now, after this child, my husband will be attached to me, Levi, because to be attached. So all these names. And these two sisters rival each other for who is going to give birth to the most children. And frankly, this chapter just gets weird after a while. It just gets weird. Like mandrakes come into the issue, which most likely are some type. There was the belief in their heads that the mandrakes were some type of aphrodisiac, that they helped with fertility. So if we take these mandrakes, this will increase your fertility.
What are mandrakes?
Mandrakes are some type of plant. It's a plant.
It's a root.
So we don't know exactly what it was, but it's some type of plant.
And then Reuben would go out and grab him, so he was involved with the whole process.
Yeah, she gets the sons involved with these mandrakes as well. Then by the end of this whole thing, we have this really weird thing going on where Laban and Jacob, and in Laban, Jacob has met his match for deceit. When I think of Laban and Jacob, I think of I don't know if you remember this scene or this Norman Rockwell picture where it's in the meat market, in the butcher market, and the little old lady is pushing up on the scale, and the butcher has got his thumb on the scale, and they're looking each other in the eye. They're both trying to cheat each other. So Laban and Jacob are all the time trying to mess with each other, to get the upper hand. And this whole chapter deals at the very end of it with the sheep. Jacob says, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take the spotted and the speckled and the brown. I'll just take those. So Laban tries to mess with him and says, okay, I'll make sure you don't get any of those. So then Jacob, again, how this works, I'm not exactly sure. He sets up a pole near the watering hole. And when the sheep go to find water, they see this pole, and this somehow, as they mate there by the watering hole, this somehow affects how they look. And they become more speckled and spotted. What's going on there, I'm not exactly sure.
There's no biological fertility.
Yeah.
The wool might be made out of a substance that can change the colors of the food.
Yeah, some have thought that maybe they go up and they bite off of this or lick this pole. Well, the text doesn't say that, but that's a possibility. And maybe there's some properties in this stick, this plant, again, that maybe causes them to become speckled or dark, and that there's something in the tree itself that's causing this. Again, it just doesn't say. In fact, all it says is that they look at it. And maybe there is something to that. We just don't know enough about it to be definitive. Bottom line is, God blesses Jacob's socks off. And Jacob is going to end up with all kinds of sheep and goats, okay, as he departs from Laban. So we see these two women battling each other out for who's going to have the most children. And in the end of all of this, Rachel that she gives birth to only has two. Remember we said names. We want to look at people who have two names, especially in the Bible. People who start off with one name and then end up with another name. You remember we have Yosef. He ends up with two names, by the way. Because when he goes down to Egypt, he gets another name from the Pharaoh. So he's a two-named person. Then we know him as Benjamin. We know him as Benjamin, Benjamin, son of my right hand, but actually his mother doesn't call him Benjamin. She calls him Ben-Oni, son of my pain. Because as she is giving birth to him, she dies. Rachel dies. We take for granted in this culture that we live in, we take for granted the ability to have children, and even in complications with childbirth, to still be able to give birth to children. In the ancient Near East, when you had complications giving birth to children, one or more was going to die. The mother was either going to die, or the child was going to die, or both were going to die. Because they had no way, they didn't even think that you could go inside of the mother and take the child out. That was just not even on the radar. It boggles the mind that we are now doing interwomb surgeries on children. That's just crazy. They're actually going in and able to do certain surgeries inside the womb. That's nuts. And yet, this is where the technology has brought us to. This is where the technology has brought us. But in the ancient Near East, giving birth to a child was a very dangerous thing. It was a very scary moment, very touch and go. And yet, in this instance, she names him Ben-Oni. Now, his father doesn't want him to be known as son of my pain. That's a real bummer to wear. What's your name? My name is Pain. What happened with you? My mom died giving birth to me. Not something you really want to wear as a moniker the rest of your life. So his father says, we'll call him Benjamin, son of my right hand. So for the rest of these chapters, we're going to watch as individuals are given two names. Jacob is going to go from Yaakov to Israel. Okay? So anytime a person has two names, we really want to watch how they struggle between those two names, what those two names mean. And these names have meanings. So we're watching what the names mean, which is important. And we're watching how they struggle between the first name they're given and the second name they're given. Will he be son of my pain, or will he be Benjamin, son of the right hand? And it's interesting that through these narratives, Benjamin becomes an object that Joseph has to use in order to test his brothers. All right. Any questions about chapter 30? A lot of stuff in that chapter. Amazing chapter, but a lot of weird stuff. Yeah.
Well, in Cinja's text, one thing I noticed in that reading was that all the kids were named by the mom except for Levi.
Yes.
And I found that intriguing because Levi is also where the priesthood came out of. It doesn't define who named him or why he was named per se, but the fact that, and he was named Levi. And I'm still trying to figure out what would happen with that. But that was kind of
when you and I talked, when you and I text on this, I think you're right that there's something important to that. Whenever we have a person named, we want to look at who named them and ask the question: is it the mother naming them? Is it the father naming them, or is it both? And last week we talked about how one of the children was named by both parents, and then one of the children. So Esau was named by both parents. Jacob was named only by his father. His father calls him Yaakov, the heel. Okay, he's the one who's crooked. His name will be changed to Yashar'el, the upright, the one who goes straight. Okay, and Jacob will struggle between being the crooked one and the one who is straight. He will wrestle between those two designations. But it's interesting, his father is the one who names this, not his mother. So there is something to this, who names them.
Or God.
Yeah, sometimes God does. But again, we want to make sure that we're looking at who does the naming. Yeah.
It seems like it's so much of this scripture to try to make one's own self comfortable with someone else.
Yes. Yeah, there's this issue of trying to one-upsmanship and moving forward above the other. And this struggle, this rivalry, this struggle that we're hinted at strongly in the prenatal, that they're struggling in the womb. Yeah.
I find it kind of interesting that even though a lot of the kids were born by the handmaidens, or, the kids were mothers, they still had, equal, value from the parents valued them it was a similar way of bringing them up, similar inheritances and all that kind of stuff.
Right. You know, in these narratives, we want to watch, and for the rest of the narrative, we want to ask this question. This is a fundamental question. Why does a parent like or not like a particular child? What is it about a particular child that a parent likes or dislikes? And we talked about this last week. Parents, whether they want to admit it or not, whether they think about it consciously or not, have favorites. And subtly play favorites. And the children pick up on this favoritism. Because it's not like the parent steps up in front of their children and says, now that I have all of you children together, I want you to know that I like you and you, but not you. They never say it like that. They will just do things for or not do things for the other one. And the children get the subtle implication that, you know what? They're not overly thrilled with me. Parents will say things that let their children know where they are on the pecking order. And they do it, like I said, in very subtle ways. When you have Jacob, who says he's standing in front of his 10 sons, and he says this to them, I have 2 sons.
Yeah.
Ouch.
I have 2 sons.
And there are 12 sitting.
And you're not one of them, is the implication. I liked Rachel, and I liked Rachel's children. I liked Yosef, and I liked Benjamin. And if you didn't figure it out, I gave Yosef a really, really nice coat. And I put him in charge of you guys. Because, frankly, I really didn't want any of you guys. And children figure out, here's another one for you. Children figure out one of those things as to whether they're wanted or not wanted. Sometimes parents have children either too early or too late. And the children figure out, I wasn't planned. They really didn't want me. And they get it.
There's 2 things, Brent. Remember the Smothers Brothers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, mother liked you best.
Mother loved you more than me.
Yeah, mother loves me more than me. Yeah.
Another thing is,
Brothers, yes.
the hardest thing for a parent is to not reveal these subtle things that, because you do pick one out from the number of children that you have.
Right.
You try to be impartial.
Sometimes you like a child because they're like you, or sometimes you like them because they're different than you. It's just the way it goes. And so as we're walking through these narratives, you're seeing the humanity of the patriarchs come to the forefront in these issues. And it causes difficulties. Yeah.
There's another thing. Names were not only named because of the way they felt at the time. Names were named because of what they would do.
Yes, sometimes it's
In the
destiny.
case of Noah,
Yes, sometimes it's your destiny, this name.
yes.
You're given a name as kind of a prophetic destiny as to what you will become. Yeah, and like I said, we're going to do some of this filling in of this concept of names. A lot more coming on that because we're moving more and more in that direction. All right, so.
I remember my mom telling me, your grandmother always treated you better and she loved you more. And therefore that's why she said that she did more for my brother and my sister. And I've come to figure out that that was not the case. It was just like they liked them better than they liked me. And here's the thing is, I take care of my mom now.
Yeah, so this.
And that, whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting how all these family dynamics come into play. By the way, you know where these family dynamics come into play? You go to something like Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, there you go.
And you start to figure out who's who in the pecking order. All right, so Hanukkah coming up. Hanukkah means dedication or rededication. Our primary sources for Hanukkah are books that we just don't usually read. If you're Catholic, you'll know two of these, because two of these are in the Apocrypha, which means hidden. And the Catholic Bibles today still have in the middle of them the Apocrypha, which means, again, hidden. So we have 1st and 2nd Maccabees. 1st and 2nd Maccabees speak to us about the background to Hanukkah. Then we have our third source around the same time period is Josephus, Flavius Josephus. He's Jewish, but he joins the Romans and becomes high up in their military, and he writes numerous histories that give us a background to the apostolic scriptures, the precursor. Now, this happens in 167 BC, from 167 to 164. So about 200 years prior to the time of Yeshua is when what we're going to be talking about happens. We have a nation called Syria. And Syria is eventually amalgamated into what becomes Greece. So that we end up with, you'll hear, Greco-Roman. Everything was going along fine because we had a man by the name of Alexander the Great, who is conquering the known world. And he is spreading what is called Hellenism. And we are still dealing with Hellenism today. Hellenism gives us philosophy, theater, sports, stadiums, coliseums, this terminology, mathematics, philosophy, stadiums, theater, all art, tons of things. They give us this culture that we are still dealing with and still looking at today. The only problem is that Alexander the Great dies. And in his death, 4 generals take over, and they divide up his empire. We're more concerned with the Seleucids. That's the group that's going to be the one that takes over for what we would call now today the land of Israel. And these 4 kings, these 4 generals that were with Alexander the Great, they take over and they divide up his kingdom. Syria revolts against all of this, and Syria starts to oppress the land of Israel. And in 167, the people of Israel revolt against Syria. And for many years, 3 years, they fight against the Syrians. And in 164, in the month of Kislev, which is close to our November, December, they are able to take back the temple, and they're able to then rededicate the temple. Now this brings us to some unfortunate mythology, because now a later source for all of this is what's called the Mishnah. 200 AD, the Mishnah is written. And the Mishnah becomes the foundation for what we know as the Talmudic literature. It's the core foundation material for the Talmud. There are 2 Talmuds, the Babylonian Talmud and the Palestinian Talmud. Okay? The authoritative Talmud for all of Orthodox Judaism primarily is the Babylonian Talmud. And the Mishnah says that the reason we celebrate for 8 days is because a cruse of oil was found when they went to rededicate the temple, and this cruse of oil had the priestly seal on it. And when they'd only had enough to burn for 1 day, and when they lit the menorah, it burned for 8 days. The interesting thing, though, is that this mentioning of this cruse of oil miracle is not found in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, nowhere, nor is it found in Josephus, anywhere. You can't find it. Like a lot of things,
It's a bedtime story.
over time, things add to history. And history becomes embellished. And things get added to it over time. Nothing wrong with calling it the Festival of Lights, nothing wrong with lighting menorah. By the way, the menorah, let's bring that up. you look at all of the archaeological evidence we have, and the 9-branched Hanukkah is a very late addition to the concept of celebrating Hanukkah. The earliest menorahs we have are 7-branch, 6, 3 on each side and 1 in the middle. Those are our earliest. Then later on, because of Hanukkah, we start adding a 9th branch. We go to a 9 branch. Yes.
Speaking of the menorah, it was to be lit all the time. The 7 branches.
Yes, in the
In
temple.
Revelation, it speaks of the 7 spirits of God.
Right.
But in our Bibles, nowhere does it say what the 7 spirits of God are. But in the book of Enoch, it lists all of these 7 spirits of God that
Actually,
the flames represent.
Yeah, I think that, hold on a minute. If you look at,
Isaiah says
Isaiah.
something about it, but
Yeah.
it does not include 7. If you count it, there's only 6.
okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, but Isaiah 11 does mention 6 spirits.
Yes.
Okay, maybe not a 7th, but I think you can argue for a 6th for sure.
In Enoch, it gives a
Yeah, Enoch does mention the
total
7th.
list of them.
Right. All right. So here's the kicker. How did we get to Hanukkah? The Syrian forces, the military, comes to the Israelites and says to them, you can no longer gather on the Shabbat. You can no longer read the Torah scroll publicly. You can no longer circumcise your children, and you can no longer publicly celebrate. No, they just basically say all outward expressions of Torah observance have to go. And what happens is, a man by the name of Mattathias in the town of Modaim had 5 sons. One of them's name is Judah. He becomes known as Maccabi, which means the hammer. And Mattathias rushes up and actually kills a man who's going to offer a pig on an altar to show all the Jews in the area that you will have to bend the knee to Syria. And when Mattathias and his sons, they began leading a guerrilla band against the Syrians, they are able to overtake them over a period of time, a 3-year period of time, and it's from this historical kernel that we get what is now known as Hanukkah. They're able to drive the Syrians back, and they're able to rededicate the temple. But 1st and 2nd Maccabees and Josephus say that they dedicate the temple as a way of mimicking what Solomon did in 1 Kings when he dedicated the temple over an 8-day period. So that's why we have the 8 days, is because historically, because they're mimicking the rededication or the dedication of the temple initially with Solomon. So with the rededication, we'll also go with 8 days. Let me bring the discussion of Hanukkah to this, to 2 major issues that I think we should think about as we come to this season. The first is this, that the culture is going to continually press upon us to be what it wants us to be. And we don't even realize how much the culture impacts us. It doesn't even register with us how much we give our attention and our time and our energy to things that the culture says are important. It doesn't even register with us that it's being driven by the culture. We think it's our idea. The culture says, though, you should have one of these, you should have one of those, you should do this, you should do that. And it swallows up our time, it swallows up our energy, and we don't even realize that all of that is being drained by the culture telling us this is what you need, this is what you should do. Anybody want to give me some examples of what I'm talking about here?
Yes, Brent.
Yes.
For example, political correctness. You cannot say this, you cannot say that. It's a hate crime.
Right.
You can't say that
Well, I'm getting to that in a moment.
Jesus is the
That's the second.
way,
That's
the
the,
truth, and the light. No
Right.
man.
that's the second divergence. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Talking to somebody the other day who has a friend who was in television or actually with commercials, And he got out of the industry after being a few years because he went into a meeting and they said, okay, we're no longer going to advertise to adults. That's not working. Our goal now is to advertise to the 3, 4, 5-year-old children. Because by getting them to believe that they want it, they will pester their parents until they buy it. So that is our new market.
Yeah. How much of what we do and what we think and what we believe is driven by Hollywood and Madison Avenue?
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah,
And we don't even, and the thing is, it's subtle. It's not as if it's,
Oh, I don't think it's subtle.
sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's not so subtle. But I think what happens is, we don't even realize the cumulative effect. I mean, what do? You gotta have a newer, faster computer.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
it's not enough that when you push the button, it goes right away. You need it even faster. I mean, you gotta have all the bells and whistles. You gotta have all the nice stuff. This is the culture driving us and saying, you gotta spend your money on this, or spend your money and time on this. The irony is, we have more knowledge, we have more access to knowledge, and we're dumber than the generation before us. I mean, Wikipedia, as an example. We got search engines that are huge. So we have all this knowledge gathered, but are we any smarter or any wiser for it? 1,
Wiser,
2,
no.
3, 4, only go ahead.
yeah. So we were talking about this at a meeting yesterday about being open-minded. And I said, well, my son said, my dad told me if I'm too open-minded, my brains might fall out. And I was like, yeah. And I said, I'm open-minded to a point. I have a permeable membrane. Not everything that's out there
He's gonna go
is
in.
going to go in here. Because I don't care. Maybe 95% of the world is doing this, but maybe 95% of the world is not is not right. Because a lot of people question like religion, this and that, blah blah blah. And I mean, I'm not gonna be so open-minded so that somebody can say, hey, if you kill somebody and drink their blood, you'll be really spiritual. I probably think that's not something I want to put in my brain.
Right.
That is not. I'm not going to be open-minded about things that are totally against what the Bible says and what is like against what the Spirit of God says inside. So. I watch a lot of things, I watch a lot of cartoons and all this stuff on TV, and I see all this stuff that is it's all driving towards the witchcraft and evil and, dragons and this and that and then how they're supposed to be nice and good and you can make friends with them and all this stuff. And it's just and it's driven like that and it's geared towards kids. And it's disgusting, and it makes me angry because there's nothing I can do about it.
Sure, and I would argue that we have a music industry and a movie
Does the
industry
same thing.
that is incredibly given over to diabolical evil. I watch movie trailers, just seeing them here and there, and I think to myself, that is so massively dark.
Yeah.
It's unreal.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing this, and they're showing all these things, and they're striving to break down social barriers, sexual barriers, all these things. They're trying to destroy them and say that if you believe that there are only 2 sexes, then somehow you're insane and you're
You're a hate monger and all this stuff.
you're this, you're that, you don't have an open mind, you don't have all these things, and and they're doing it not just sexually, but they're doing it to say like, well, if you don't believe that a 12-year-old could fall in love with a 30-year-old, then you're just, you're ageist, or you're this, or you're that. I mean, they like to name all these things and say all these things, and they're not true. They're just trying to make to give a mantra, or trying to make what do you call it when they do that in politics?
Let me make this comment. I'm coming back to your phone. I think this is my theory, just throwing this out there. I think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg of all of the sexual corruption in Hollywood, politics, sports. I think it's going to eventually, it's like a volcano. It's going to, right now we just see it bubbling up a little bit. I think it's going to erupt. That's just my view. One here and then one here. Go ahead.
one thing that along with that is a lust thing, I think that if you really look at what's happening with commercials, how many car commercials are on there? What's the pressure? What do they show you? All these people are in the car dealerships. They're all buying a car, and it's like, give me, I deserve it. But then what's happening? We're in bondage with our finances. We're in bondage with debt. And who are we in debt to? So it's all going to the same thing, the lust of money, the lust of things, the lust of just doing what you want to do, because it's like an entitlement. Don't tell me I'm doing anything wrong, it's my right,
Yeah.
Yeah. Right here, go ahead.
You
Good word.
said a minute ago, probably the biggest tool that Satan has to develop the minds of young people is television. And if you take, for example, you look at the typical program on television, other than the fact of probably the Honeymooners and Archie Bunker, the family is a lawyer, a doctor, something, they got everything in the world imaginable.
Yep.
Nice homes.
And
Yeah.
so young people today, they look in their house that they live in. They don't understand that mom and dad have worked for years and years and years to get what's in that house, and they think that they should have it right now.
Right. There's more here.
I was thinking about Thanksgiving, how you can't get through a day and a meal without the stores continue to come out. And they're staying open to 2 in the morning. And
Oh, my
you
word.
think about over the years, the number of folks that rush out right after dinner, and there's even been deaths at
Right.
Walmart fighting
Yeah, they're
over.
conditioning us to say, you know what, man, after Thanksgiving, you gotta go to be Black Friday.
Yeah.
So we're gonna make all the deals, man. We're gonna just, everything's gonna be on sale. So rush to the mall, rush to the stores. And it's driven by greed and by
Right.
this desire to have something better.
Right.
Right here, go ahead.
Okay, so earlier you were talking about the events being like super. I was just gonna say, like, it's not just TV, it's like it's video games, which everything has.
I would agree with you. Yeah, I don't think there's a whole genre of movies, videos, games, TV. You have to be extremely judicious because the pipeline out of which all this stuff is coming is a sewer. So I'm not saying there's not some good in there, but boy, you have to be extremely careful and cautious. Yeah.
There's 2 areas of life that are very different from the Bible that in American culture I never really thought about until recently was courtship as far as dating. I mean, American dating in the last, since I was a kid, it's different than it was in the 1900s, 1800s, or biblical times. And it's so much so that I don't really have any much concept of it, other than perhaps a little bit of maybe more recording and whatnot. And then also property ownership is I think very different than what America is teaching. As far as America is teaching either capitalism or corporatism or socialism and communism, all 4 of those are very different.
Right. Absolutely. Economic systems.
It's hard to understand what you believe.
Right.
Like when I first time I read it, I had to read it a bunch of times just to kind of be like, I don't really get it.
Everything that we think is being driven by the culture, asking us to think in a particular way. Last thing, so here's the convergence that Hanukkah has to bring us to. First thing is culture. I think Hanukkah should stop us. We should do an inventory to say, how much is this culture impacting the way I think and what I do? That's the first thing. The second thing is this. Notice that the government, Syria, came against the Israelites and said, this is what we want you to do. We want you to give up Torah. We want you to give up circumcision. We want you, where the government was asking. My belief is this. We have a government that will eventually start pressing us to give up our faith expressions.
Oh, it's working on it already.
It's already doing this.
It's already happening.
It's already happening in very subtle and not so subtle ways. So let's watch the squeeze. The culture squeezes from one end and says, look, you need to think this way. You need to think this way about money, about sex, about everything. Education, every facet of life, you need to think this way. Genders. And then the government pushes in from the other side and says, we're going to take this away from you, we're going to take this away from you, we're going to take this away from you. And there's the squeeze to capitulate. And when it came right down to it, most people were willing to just let the government do whatever they wanted to do. Most of the Jewish people just said, well, you know what, if the government's asking us to do this, it must be right. So, all right, fair enough. If they don't want us to meet, we won't meet. If they don't want us to do this, we won't do that. And it's because they had been conditioned by the culture to let the government just say, well, you know what, if the government says it's the right thing to do, then it's the right thing to do, because, well, they know best. And the government has part of the subculture to say to you, you need to let us tell you and make the decisions for you. We will tell you how to spend your money, how to educate your children, how to live your life. We know best as the government. And when the government came to take away all these rights, there was hardly anybody to stand up and say, you know what, forget this. We're not taking this lying down. We're not going to just run over us. There was one guy who finally rallied everybody and said, you know what, we're putting together an army, we're heading to the hills, we're going to fight this. And said, enough of this nonsense. They don't have the right to tell us how to live our lives. And so there's the squeeze from the government coming, and there's the squeeze, the cultures already, both have been pushing against. To where when somebody actually says, this is what God says, people look at you like you're from Mars because they go, well, that's not what the government says, that's not what the culture says. And Hanukkah ought to call us back to the realization that it's real easy for groupthink to set in and whole cultures to just say, well, you know, whatever the culture says is fine and whatever the government says is fine. And we're not going to think outside the government or the cultural box. Because that's how they have brought us to think. And we don't even realize that that's where our thinking is because, well, that's how it's supposed to be. Nobody even challenges anymore because, well, that's the way it's supposed to be, right? You see our culture. You see the culture pushing us. This is a classic example, and I'm going to end with this. You see the culture pushing us to say, if you believe that two guys having relations with each other, or two women having relations with each other, you're homophobic. It's your fault. It's all about you. Or if you don't believe that there's 10 different genders.
27 now.
Yeah, there's 27 now. It used to be the world I grew up in.
Two.
The world I grew up in said there was two of them.
Yeah.
You could either put M or F. Because you were either male or you were female. Now they got other.
Or lots of others.
And I'm the nut if I say, no, there's just two. There's still just two. The culture says, well, look at how bigoted you are. I mean, you're just a bigot. You're phobic, you're bigotry, all that. And I'm saying, no, look, I love these people. I have no animosity or hatred for anyone that chooses to go against what the biblical text says. But I do believe that there would be consequences for going against the biblical text. And that I should be a voice to say, you know, this is not the way it should go. And I've said this. Go back and look at the Third Reich. And you know what they started doing? They started conditioning the way people think. Very subtle through the media and through all kinds of means. They started trying to get people to group think.
So did Stalin.
And this group think eventually had a whole nation basically saying, you know, we're kind of okay just genociding a whole group of people. It's all right. It'll be fine. And nobody stood up. Nobody stood up and said, you know, this is wrong. Because, well, it must be okay. One of the two in the back, go ahead.
Two different things. One is the correct pronoun that people try to enforce. They want to get everyone else who does not agree to use their version of truth. They say, well, call me this. But then I would ask them, say, well, you please refer to yourself as my truth, which is the other thing. So there's a truth battle, I think.
Absolutely.
But the other thing is with some homosexuals is there are some people who may have this natural, as they call it, desire for a wrong gender. In the same way as a straight man, I have what the Bible calls wrong desires for the opposite gender, you know, ones that we all have to control, called lust. And I think that's whether you are desiring one or the other, it's wrong outside of marriage.
Absolutely.
And I think that there's one viewpoint when someone who's desiring something is wrong and resists against it.
Right.
That is like an alcoholic being 10 years without a drink, even though he knows that he has a problem with that.
Right.
So I think that it's easy to show them love when they choose, no matter what their desires might be, to resist that flesh.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you brought up, you kind of hinted at something I want to, you know, look at how the culture, because of economics, look at the culture drove economics driving this, said, now let's look at the logic of this, just the logic alone. If that's all you looked at, how healthy is it to put nicotine, smoke in your lungs? Just common sense would tell you this is not, but since tobacco was driving the government and paying for government people to be employed, then they were getting elected and they were protecting this industry and they just kept perpetuating selling cigarettes. Even though common sense would tell you, just common sense alone would tell you, putting smoke down your lungs over a long period of time is probably not the healthiest way to go. And will probably lead you to having respiratory problems. Duh!
But now it's okay to do
But it was driven by an industry that was funding, and this is how the culture, so what I'm saying, this is the one example. Jimmy, go ahead. We gotta get going. Go ahead.
So one of the things about our liberties and our viewpoints being crushed little by little, not long ago in Canada they made it to where they could take away your children if you taught them that homosexual relationships are wrong.
Right.
They basically said if a parent teaches their children that homosexuality is wrong, they are discriminating and they are teaching their children falsities, and therefore we need to remove the children from their house so that we can teach them the truth. And our culture is going that direction.
Is that Canada?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's right here. 1, 2, 3. Go. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so just an example, you know, I see these kids who wear the Che Guevara shirts, you know, black people and all these people who are socialists, and they're like, yeah, you know, we don't believe in the, you know, oppressing homosexuals and all this stuff, and you're wearing a Che Guevara shirt, and you have no idea what that man did. Because he killed homosexuals and black people, and he was racist. And this whole culture, they're teaching them that socialism is okay, you know, and that they have a right to demand that their point of view be heard, but not yours, you know. And it is, you know, from the outside, they're teaching that in schools, and then the government is doing that squeeze you're talking about, and then there's one other thing about. You know, the smoking. We can't smoke. We can't even drink soda in Seattle without a tax. But it's okay to decriminalize shooting heroin in Seattle. Yeah. And they're going to do that. I mean, where's the logic in that? You can't kill yourself with sugar.
Let's talk about the government.
You can do the opiate.
How many times lately, within the last couple of years or so, have you heard on television the phrase, the ruling class and the working class?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
So the ruling class has the right to tell the working class what to do because we aren't smart enough to know what to do for ourselves, according to them.
Except we're the ones that hired them to be
And that's the
there.
thing, they
Weird.
should be the servant class.
Yeah.
I know what you're doing. Trying to get off. Go ahead.
I was just gonna mention, I was at the salon, the other night, I was reading a magazine, and I was looking through, and there's this, article entitled When Love Knows No Bounds, and it was a story about a man marrying his own mother. It's not written like, this is shocking, it was like, saying pretty much, why isn't this okay? Why isn't this just okay? They're not gonna have children, so it doesn't matter, the man should be able to marry his own mother.
First Corinthians has an
Now,
example of that.
this is the culture,
This is the culture we live in.
you
And
know.
also, there was, something suggesting that the Holocaust never happened.
Oh, yeah, there's revisionist history. We've got that as revisionist history, which is one of the reasons why every time I'm in Israel, I go to Yad Vashem to remind myself, no, it actually happened, and there was a lot of people involved. Because we have the pictures. So, but yes, I was at an evangelical event. This is evangelicals. So these would consider themselves, mainline Christians. And there are segments of of mainline Christianity that are trying to undermine the validity of what happened and the amount of what happened and the extent of what happened. And say, well, it was just a few, it was just a small amount, and it was very isolated. And it's like,
I'm sorry.
so there's this revisionist history going on right now within evangelicalism against the extent of the Holocaust.